I liked it better with the narration than getting into the minutes where I just thought, I have to figure all this out. I have to figure what Sean's telling you what it says.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Sorry folks, we're running a couple minutes late. Welcome everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the February Crozet Community Advisory Council meeting. I'm Dave Stone, the chair. Let's start with our normal going around and do introductions. Tom Loach, CCAC.
Please give your neighborhood so that we can residents, because we all know that everybody's.
Mark Violet, across the tracks.
Phil Best, I live in the greater Crozet metropolitan area.
Smart Alex.
West of it.
Sandra Muse, Regal.
Allie Pesh, Winridge Avenue.
Sean Bird off of St. George.
Doug Bates, a little ways up Whitehall Road.
And Alec represents you on the supervisors, and I live in Yellowstone.
Jarvis Gap Road, Kim London.
I'm Jenny Moore. I'm the planning commissioner for Whitehall, and I live on Blue Ridge Avenue.
I'm John McKeon, office up actually in Batesville instead of Crozet.
We got Whitehall, we got Greenwood.
It's all right.
Nice to
We're
have
rolling
you.
metropolitan here.
This is
That's the excerpts.
And audience two, please.
I'm Irish O'Toole. I'm the executive director of technologies and innovation for the county schools. Robert Rosales, assistant director for infrastructure and support services for Albemarle County Schools.
I'm Valerie Long, I live in Old Trail.
Tim Tolson, live behind Mid Springs and president of the Crozet Community Association.
Ray Grant, I live in Old Trail.
I'm Thomas Jackson. I live Savannah Court, and my mom will be in it shortly. She's finding parking.
Hi, Brian Day, Emerald Ridge.
Terry Miyamoto from the Crozet Trails crew, and I live in the Highlands.
Jillian Barrett from Freeing.
I'm Allison Rabel with the Daily Progress. I live in the city.
Christopher Perez, county staff, reviewing the special use permit for the Albemarle County Wireless Western Albemarle High School facility.
Everybody?
Mary Ann Jackson came in, and I'm Mike Marshall to the Crozet Gazette.
Great. And we have two more.
Oh, I'm Lori Schweller from North Carolina, representing Milestone Communications.
I'm Chris Hernandez, and I'm representing Milestone Communications, the developer.
Great, thanks. And again, welcome everybody. There's agendas. There should be extra agendas over by the door, so don't need one for yourself. Just real quickly, any comments, suggestions on the agenda as handed out? No? Okay.
Are the times going to stay considering there are changes, or are you going to get to that?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other comments, changes? I think the only thing, and we'll do it now, that Ann was suggesting, we have two main things this evening, as you can see from the agenda. Milestone's back talking about some changes to their SUP application for the proposed communications tower at Western. My understanding is you guys have just resubmitted. So I think we'll see how timing goes, but I think we mostly want to hear what the changes are. And I think Albemarle County Public Schools, we had some questions last time. They were going to talk briefly about that, but then I think we were planning to try to condense the time somewhat, knowing that we typically like to wait for staff report, which is not done given that it's a new, revised application. So we'll pick that up at another time, if that's okay with everybody. Which might then shorten our 45 minutes and give us more time to talk about the second agenda item, which is, again, following up on the survey results in context of what do we think that might mean in terms of master plan. Is that good with everybody? All right, thanks. I guess one other business item, Mike Kunkel is not here today. I sent a note around. Would somebody please volunteer to be a scribe for this meeting? You don't mind?
No, it's fine.
Thank you. Excellent. Great. Perfect. Mike did, before he disappeared today, send out minutes from the last meeting. Did everybody get a chance to look? Any comments, changes? Motion to accept?
Motion accepted.
Second? Discussion? All in favor? Thank you very much. That's that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lori and Chris to talk about the changes to the SUP.
Hi everyone, thank you for inviting us again. We're pleased to be here. As I mentioned, my name is Lori Schweller. I'm an attorney with LaClaire, Ryan, here in Charlottesville, and we're representing Milestone Communications, which is the applicant for a special use permit for the wireless facility proposed for Western Albemarle. I'm going to try not to be redundant with your last meeting, December 20th, but really just to focus on those changes in the plans and to answer the questions that you raised during that meeting. Most of your questions, however, had to do with what did the schools need, how will this benefit the schools and the children in the area and the greater community. And so that's the highlight of this presentation. And for that part of the presentation, I'll turn it over to Ira. So I just want to get through the changes to the plans. You're free to ask questions if you like, and to show you those things you asked for. But then we'll turn it over to Ira, and you can ask him questions, and you can ask him questions, obviously. We introduced Milestone last time. Chris Hernandez is the project manager for this project. As you know, Milestone partners with schools and other government entities to provide wireless towers on public property. There's a rent sharing agreement, which I'll go over with you once again, but it provides a community service while also being economically feasible because of the commercial carriers on the facility. We talked about Chantel being that devoted commercial carrier and the service that was needed in the Crozet area where that arrow is pointing. This facility would cover that area, and with that we would have this coverage for Chantel. Moving on to the updates on the site. Again, you saw this, the location proposed. Some of the changes that we are showing you today, I mentioned it, but I don't think I showed to you. We're going to do some plantings here, 22 eastern cedars along the front of the school at the intersection. Those cedars will effectively block the view of the facility through that intersection, and I'll show you the views that I'm talking about. This was requested by staff and also by the Architectural Review Board, to whom we presented this application last month. We'll also have a 200-foot radius preservation of trees, of course only on the property we control, the school property, and we'll have 6 eastern cedars planted along here to screen some of the views from the properties south of the school. That shouldn't be there. Dear. Sorry. Sorry about that. Let me just get back to where I was. Now, one of the major changes to the plan was requested. Was requested by staff as a result of comments from Fire and Rescue. You'll recall that the access was going to be under the bleachers, though the construction access would be along here. The permanent access for technicians would be under the bleachers. That was not acceptable to Fire and Rescue because you can't get a fire truck under the bleachers. And so access has changed. I'll show you that drawing. This is the basic location of the site. These trees in the compound area do have to be behind So this was the first access easement that we showed you in December. This is going to be the permanent here, and then the temporary here for construction. This is the new one. So construction is the same as the permanent easement. We, of course, will be submitting all of the necessary applications for that, for critical slowed waivers. This is the same elevation you saw last time. Albemarle School's at 140, and this is what I was here to talk about, why this height is needed. Chantel will be at 130, which is what Chantel needs to provide the service that we showed them on Propagation Maps. We do have letters of interest from Verizon and T-Mobile, and so presumably they would be at locations below that. We know from talking with Dean Tisdale at the schools that the schools use AT&T, so there's a possibility AT&T would have some interest, but that's in the future. So you can see there's a reason why 5 arrays would be useful at this site. You asked questions about the antenna mounting in comparison to the Albemarle High School site. As we talked about last time, we're requesting a special exception because under the zoning ordinance for a by right site that doesn't require any special approvals, you would keep your antennas 18 inches from the monopole. We, of course, need to be farther out, and we're requesting 43 3/4 inches at the closest point and 75 inches at the farthest point. The side where the antennas are mounted is 8 feet wide. When we did the Albemarle High School site, we used this array, and it's a much larger array. This was approved for AHS, and that's 12.5 feet on each of the 3 sides. So these little blobs here represent antennas, so that's a total of 12 antennas. To show you side by side, the Albemarle site had 12 antennas on each of its arrays, and the one we're requesting would have 9 antennas on each of its arrays, and it's a smaller plane. You also asked for photos of the existing Albemarle High School site. The monopole is up, and Albemarle High School site, Albemarle High School's antennas are on the monopole, but the commercial antennas are not up yet. So I'm showing you the photos of the monopole, which, as you can see, blend in with the light poles at the school. It has the antennas on top that the schools will be using. You can see it looks very similar to the light poles in the parking lot and in the ball fields, which have lights on them. So once it gets the full arrays on there, it'll be quite similar to the way those light poles look. And that's a view of the pole from the entrance to the ball field there.
How tall is that? Is it
125?
It is 125.
And the lights are about 80.
That's what we think, yes. I showed you the results of the balloon test last time, so I want to just show you some updates because we weren't showing all 5 arrays.
Sorry, what field is it near the AHS? Is that
the football field with the track around it. So as we pointed out, the site will be mostly visible in the near vicinity. There's one point in Old Trail on high elevation where it's visible, and I'll show you that one more time. This view you won't see. As I mentioned, we'll be planting trees along here, so you won't have this view right in front of the school. Similar here, we're sitting at the intersection with Old Trail Drive. You won't have the view of the facility in the distance because there will be trees planted along here. So when we went to the Architectural Review Board, their job is to assess the impact of this proposed facility on the entrance corridor, which is Route 250. And there are 2 places where it would be seen without this screening, this location, and then one more. And this is the other location. So we're standing right in front of Brownsville Elementary looking across the street. If you're driving along the entrance corridor, this would be, in their words, a fleeting glimpse of the facility, and they were unconcerned about the view. So given that those were the only two locations where it would be visible on the entrance corridor, the Architectural Review Board did recommend approval to the Planning Commission. There are a couple of places at homes close by, as you saw last time, where the facility may be seen through the trees when the leaves are off the trees. The Jackson property, and then this property, so Jackson, that I just showed you is here. And then back here off Emerald Lane. And you can see with 5 arrays now and ball field lights, so it's right behind the football field. And this is that location from Old Trail, about 1.5 miles away, so it would be far in the distance, 1.5 miles, and you can see it there in the distance as well. So again, the locations that would be most visible are around the school, and so we got a few more photo simulations to show you there with 5 arrays instead of just the 1. And so these are viewpoints from around the school. So with that segue, I would like to introduce Ira and tell you how this facility will benefit the schools. Ira is Executive Director of Technologies and Innovation with the schools Department of Learning, Engineering, Access, and Design.
Good evening. Our purpose in this project is really simple. One of the absolute commitments of the school board and the county government has joined us in this is to create equal opportunity for all of our children, no matter where they live in the county, no matter their family wealth, no matter what opportunities are provided in the home. One of the things that we know is that students who lack access to broadband signals at home are significantly limited in the work they can do. This starts right at the beginning when we see connected children being able to work on any snow day or being able to work all evening on projects. And it goes all the way through high school, and we hear from parents all the time, we don't have any broadband at home, we don't have access to that at home. How is my child supposed to keep up with all the students who do? So whether a child lives in Gilmora or Greenwood or Whitehall or Mallside, it's our job to make sure they have every learning opportunity throughout the day, and so they can explore the world on their own. We have challenges in this county in doing that. We have large areas where broadband, as you know here, is simply not available, no matter what. We also have large areas of topography that make generating effective signals really, really difficult. In the county schools, we have committed significant resources over the last few years to do a couple of projects to correct this. One is to build out our own fiber network that links our schools together in a way that gives us sustainable cost management over time, so we're no longer paying commercial carrier rates for everything. The other thing is to develop an LTE wireless system that allows students to connect to school resources when they take their one-to-one computers home, and so they can continue their work throughout the day. Oh, there we go, okay. Topography is our biggest challenge. We believe that if we have, our evidence of our propagation tests indicates that if we have a 145-foot tower year, we can reach about 400 students who now don't have access. That's 400 children who can now connect who can't otherwise. Every step we go down in height, because of the system both we and Chantel use, trees get in the way, shadows of the hills get in the way, and we start losing students dramatically. We have a handout.
I should have pointed out, there's a handout there and on the table when you go out that has the same information as in this presentation, so you can take that with you.
We have, we did propagation maps, but I'll warn you, these maps are best case scenarios based on us not having trees, in fact. And trees get in the way of signals, certainly our signals. When you look at these sites, when you see the green, when you see the bright green, those are areas we're going to be able to probably reach by simply equipping students with a MiFi device, a simple device they can have in their home that they can hook their computer to. Where you see the blue are places we would have to give them an outside mounted antenna, still, you know, in order to signal to them. This is, you know, a constantly challenging situation for us. Here we've mapped a whole collection of our student addresses, but again, this is more challenging than it looks. We have student street addresses. We know those houses are not there on the curb. They are down the hills and back around things and stuff. And the geometry of radio signals is that the steeper, you know, we can get, the better our signal becomes, you know, as it's penetrating through things. So, while this tower seems high in some ways, I mean, ideally, if it was up to the engineers who work with me, it would be higher, because the higher it is, the more effective it will be. But we also know that there's, you know, we're always balancing a sense of aesthetics and a sense of what the needs of the world are. There are challenges to every communication system. You know, we have power lines running over the mountains. We have roads running over the mountains. We have things that maybe things would look more beautiful without, but they're essential. We also think that in this day and age, our ability to improve basic cell phone service throughout the western edge of this county is a health and safety concern. One of the things we will be doing with this tower is that every Albemarle County police car will have the MiFi device in it in order to connect securely through our system rather than through commercial systems, whenever that's possible. This is all part of a system. The Albemarle High School tower is one part of it. This is a second part. And using emergency communication towers that we have other places in counties are other parts of it. Our goal is to not leave any child behind, and this is a big part of how we're going to do this. Every step down, the green shrinks, and the blue increases, and the areas not covered increases. It's just a basic fact of the way signals go, and there's not a lot we can do about that with contemporary technology. The other thing that these towers give us, and our arrangement with Milestone helps us with, is it's not our goal to always come back to the taxpayers of Albemarle County and ask for more money when we need to upgrade things we're doing. Our partnership with Milestone will allow us to basically create a revenue stream equal to what our maintenance costs will be for this system over time. which has been one of our primary goals, is to make this as self-sustaining as it possibly could be. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Regarding this antenna that some students would require, are families expected to buy these antennas, or are they provided?
We're providing. We would provide all student connectivity equipment. That's part of being a student in our schools.
And this is going to cover the cost of that?
Yes.
Yeah?
One more question. I know that you can't consider health and safety as far as the county. But has the school done any studies or looked into the studies about any safety considerations from having the towers that close to the school?
We've done extensive studies and do continuous research about this. It's actually the radio signals from this tower, the angle would probably not even touch the school property in any particular place. A bigger concern is if it was further away and directly at the same height as the school would go. But even then, there just is really no evidence that at distance this creates any problems. You know, and I know that this is emerging science, but believe me, we take the health and safety of our students, you know, with absolute seriousness. And I would not be here in front of you asking for anything that I think would be in any way detrimental to our children.
Is that on the table? Last questions?
Yes.
So I think one scientific study that I want to bring to the attention isn't actually about the health of students, it's actually about the health of European honeybees, which have been installed at the DSA program. And there you have a 2-mile radius minimum foraging radius around their hive, which encompasses the tower. And with prolonged exposure to the electromagnetic radiation from cell phone towers at close distances, which they will be near in their foraging pattern, it actually disrupts their navigational mechanisms and makes them unable to return to the hive. And that was a project that was really driven by our program, and I guess that my concern is what is the feasibility of this tower's radiation not affecting humans but not causing colony collapse disorder in our bees?
Well, I'll give you an exact corollary here. At Monticello High School, we have an entire beekeeping program that sits under Carter's Mountain, which has far more antennas than we could ever imagine here. And the bees are doing incredibly well. In fact, the population has increased 11-fold since they were installed. They produced massive amounts of honey within the first year. It's been an amazing success story. And like I said, it is sitting directly underneath all of the arrays on Carter's Mountain. So from our work with our students at Monticello High School, we see no evidence of that at all.
What would you be conducting, like, in the event of that occurring? Would there be measures taken to find a correlation just in case?
We're always evaluating everything we do. That's a constant process. You know, we have lots of government agencies who we work with all the time on every kind of health and safety concern. It's just that, you know, we actually have a direct model that's going on right now. And I really encourage you in the ESA to get with the students at Monticello and talk about that. It's something we should have linked together.
My concern last time was, and maybe you can speak to this, we talked about the financial benefit to the schools. So my question is, there's this incoming revenue stream if this is adopted, correct? How is it distributed to the county schools, and does Western or the Crozet schools benefit disproportionately because they're the home of the equipment?
Well, the money would be distributed the way all revenues that come to the county schools are. So Monticello High School and Cale Elementary don't get to keep all the revenue from Fifth Street Station. Although it impacts them the most, you know, having that in their community. Albemarle High School doesn't get to keep all the revenue from Stonefield, although that's more from the tower there. We are a community school system, we serve the county, and revenues are distributed as they're needed across the county. You know, we don't expect any feeder pattern or school area to pay for all its projects, say the addition to Western that will begin this summer. That's not a reasonable way of doing business within a community. You know, every school has its needs, every area has its needs, and we trust the school board to focus those revenues where they're best needed.
So the most direct impact is the benefit for the expanded wireless opportunities for the students. Financially, at the end of the day, it's so diluted because it goes into the general fund and then gets dispersed throughout the county that the $400,000 is for the benefit of Crozet students. We're talking
Over 10 years.
We're talking 400 students that we can buy equipment for, and that will have signal. I think that's pretty significant benefit. And that, you know, those numbers will change over time, you know, because those population numbers change, so.
I guess I'd like a little clarification about the 400 students that you're suggesting would get access.
Right.
And that many of them don't have access now. I think that was the wording up there. Like, where, how, you know, how was that data collected?
First, we collect our address data for all our students and we map it to things. Now, people can have certain kinds of satellite services and things like that that we don't know about, but we also talk to our students and we survey consistently. You know, this kind of access is not a huge issue if you go up to 29 corridor. We don't get that kind of issue there, but we get it here, and we get it in the southern end of the county. So what we looked at was the addresses where reasonable broadband was possible, which it is not in large parts of the area, and that's where our count comes from. So people can have, you know, a MiFi system that they're a metered thing through Verizon or through AT&T in certain places. You can buy a HughesNet system in certain places. Again, it's a metered connection with limited kind of things. We don't consider that the kind of access our students need. We don't want students to be doing their homework and counting the dollars as they go out. We don't think that's a reasonable way to create an equitable situation for our kids.
So in order for me to correct the minutes that I'm taking here, you said earlier with a 140-foot tower, you would reach 400 children who do not have access to be able to get it today.
Right.
And that's different from what you just said about you think maybe in that neighborhood there might be 400 houses that might not have it.
No, no.
So did you actually assess?
These are our student addresses.
Did you actually survey those homes to find out if they have it or not? That's the problem is we have information people say, yeah, fine, sir. So I would like to find out what the truth is.
The truth is this. There is no way within those areas that we can provide the kind of media services to people who live at these 400 addresses. It just is not, it's not a reasonable thing. We have staff members, we have results from student surveys, we do our Speak Up survey every year to track down what students say. This is one of the #1 things we hear all the time. We hear it from teachers. We hear it from principals who say, can you please connect our kids? So is the 400 an absolute number that will last forever? No, people with kids will move out, move in, and change. It is a number based on the addresses and where broadband is available in this area.
Can you just, for hearing me, go back to that slide? See the wording that was used?
It was many of whom.
Many.
Many of whom currently have no access.
Right.
400 homes of 400 students. I'm just confused. Are you talking about addresses or students? I'm trying to figure out exactly what percentage of students are actually going to benefit from this, and relative to the, you know.
Okay, well, here's my job.
The implications for the rest of the community.
Here's my job. Every student is my responsibility.
I want every kid to have access to the internet, believe me.
So if it was 2, I would have responsibility to do something about it.
Right.
Okay. I can't.
There's like a risk and benefit.
Well, I'm not sure what the risk is. I'm not sure what the risk is, because the risk is that you'd have improved emergency service access, you'd have improved cell phone service to the rest of the community. The benefit is that those students, whether it's 400 and 394, will now be able to access, you know, their schoolwork when they're at home. And if we had a system of doing this, if we could fly planes over the county all the time and broadcast a signal down, I mean, there may certainly be other possible ways, but we only have one real way of providing this service to this part of the county, and that's through a tower like this. It just is, you know, in November I was down in Broward County, Florida, where they have everybody lit up. I could light up Broward County, Florida very easily too. It's completely flat and it's no problem. Here, we need a certain angle of attack with our radio signals to get to people's homes. And you know, I would like to think that every child in Greenwood and in Whitehall has the same access as every child in Old Trail. That's, you know, again, that's my job.
You said that your engineers, if they could, they would raise this. What would be the optimal height to hit the most maximum amount of kids? And you also said that if it went higher, you know, the radio frequency, it's above.
Safer, theoretically, right? Higher
Theoretically.
So I don't know that we're arguing about the view of it, or I think it's more of the safety to the amount of kids that are going to have connectivity that's really important here.
We originally sort of targeted 185 as a height that we thought would do the most, you know, in what's reasonable to build. You know, there are also, you know, just the basic structural facts of, you know, how big a tower you're going to build. Because, and I said this to the school board, we can figure out a way to get to 80%, 90% of the kids across the county. The last 10 are always going to be, 10% is going to be always extremely difficult to reach. So there becomes a point where, yeah, if we went to a 300-foot tower, you know, we might hit more, but the cost benefit would disappear completely. You know, we have to find some other routes to those homes. But that's what we originally began with, was the question of what would a 185-foot tower. But we took comments from staff and stuff seriously and looked at, you know, and looked at what we could do at the height we're proposing now. It's, again, I've been working in educational technology since, you know, back in the last century. You know, I do not have safety concerns about this. I think, you know, actually the dispersal of the energy is really reasonable, you know, very quickly. But I also think that it's important for us to, you know, find the right mix where we can afford, this can be afforded to be built, where we have the support of the community, and we can get the most students possible within, you know, the range of that.
In terms of numbers, that 400 is a good number, but I don't know what that number is representing. How many students live in the area of those 400 students? Are we talking about 12,000 students, and 400 of which are having a problem? How many students will still have a problem?
We probably think we'll be down to perhaps under 100 in this western feeder pattern. And, you know, to that, then we have to challenge ourselves to look at other solutions that will come to that. Those solutions, of course, cost more, you know, as a way around it. This is, you know, our feeder patterns are very large. Covers a lot of area. One tower is not going to reach everybody. It's going to, we could do 185 and we still wouldn't get everyone, you know. But, so, you know, if you look at our school populations here, we're talking approximately 10% of the students that, you know, we're going to reach.
So having spent the majority of my career in support of educational technology, what studies have you consulted that would indicate that there's a correlation between broadband access to the high school resource and the efficacy of its educational efficacy? Have you consulted any studies?
Hundreds.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Hundreds of studies.
And what was the conclusion?
The conclusion is that the more access children have, the greater their opportunity and the greater their academic success.
Via broadband?
Yes.
I'd be interested to see your bibliography if we
Well, you know, we can send you as many as you want. You know, this is just evidence piles up in dramatic ways, especially with the most vulnerable students, that this has the biggest impact. It's why we have devoted so much energy to this. It's why school districts across the country are devoting their energy to this. We don't do this because this is fun to do. We do this because we know what the results are. We know what education looks like now. We know what employers are looking for, what colleges are looking for. We know what employers, you know, we know that the things that employers say are the most important things, the skills that students will come to them with.
So when you're providing, thanks. I asked for the studies to be cited. I would like to see what you're citing. And are you actually creating corporate drones, or are you creating citizens of the United States here? Because corporate needs and demands, you know, are only one part of the educational experience.
I think you asked for studies. I think I'll try to maybe provide a couple of studies. And we do need to then wrap up this discussion, so I'd say one or two more last questions. And
I just have a question. I wanted to harken back to something you said earlier about how the police and first responders would have access to a secure network connected directly to the school.
Through the schools.
Through the school system. Do you feel that would provide them with a better opportunity to be responsive to emergencies at the school?
I can't speak for the police department. What I can say is there are two things that working relationships we have right now. If you go into our school parking lots at night, especially in remote areas of the county, you'll see police cars there every night because they connect using our network. They all have login to our secure system. What we do know is there's concern on a number of levels about police using commercial carriers for what should be secure communications. So every place we can move away from that to where police can connect to our network that we control is a step in security and making sure certain things can't be monitored, can't be tracked, and things like that. I think, and I'll say this simply because one of my former careers, I was a New York City police officer. Every step we make to improve police communications improves public safety. There is simply nothing worse than police officers not being able to communicate effectively in situations. So this isn't the only thing, sort of quiver in the arrows, arrow in the quiver for police communications, but it's one way that we think, and I've worked with the county IT department on this, to talk about how we improve service to the police department.
You had said before that you weren't concerned about any safety issues, and I know you must be aware that the county has an ordinance about cell phone towers, and that what's being asked is not compliant with that ordinance. Are you concerned about that at all? And I guess to piggyback on that question, how would you feel if it was just a private property owner that wanted to build a tower of this nature and they would get the revenue from that and it wasn't the school? So are you worried at all that you're asking and supporting the county to violate its own cell phone tower ordinance?
I think a lot of ordinances have been written at different times and need updating, and it's not my thing to suggest legislation. My problem with cell phone towers, if somebody built this on the property next to the school, is that our students would lose the access to it.
So that wouldn't be okay, but this one's...
No, it would be, I have no safety concerns about it. I would simply say that our students would no longer benefit from it, nor the police, nor, I would have no safety concerns about it. I don't have safety concerns about the fact that we have a very large high school, as I pointed out, sitting underneath a mountain completely covered with arrays. There is not evidence that this is a problem. And Monticello High School, if you go there, you're looking right up at, a massive series of antennas. We don't see a problem with it. This is me speaking, from my level of expertise, which is, I'm not a medical doctor, but
I wasn't asking about that. I was asking about the ordinance. So, with the ordinance in place, if this were built on the adjacent property and the school were not to have the benefits from it,
it would be.
Then, do you see what I'm saying?
Not really.
To me, as planning commissioner, I look at the county's ordinance, and the ordinance says, it doesn't say, does it help school kids, or does it make less, homeless cats and puppies? It's about like an ordinance, and that we follow it. So,
I think laws
my
are living.
concern is if the private property owner were to be the one who would be financially benefiting from this, would we look at it the same way? Because we absolutely should be looking at it the same way because we have an ordinance.
Well, I think laws are living documents that are there to serve the community. That's my vision of democracy. So that's all I can say about that.
One quick follow-up on your dot map. So you mentioned Whitehall and Greenwood, but those are out of the distance that this tower would supply. And we also have broadband coming in through a CenturyLink project in Wilson Mills, which is going to pick up some of your yellow dots, I think, on this map. But anyway, talk to me about what you meant by the Whitehall and Greenwood.
Well, we do reach Whitehall and Greenwood in the blue. We do reach that. Into it, we don't reach everybody, as I said, but we reach a a number of students that, a significant number of students that we can pick up in the, that are in the darker blue on this map. You can see that we're hitting areas all the way up to the Augusta County line. So we are picking up significant areas. It's just that it's not the MiFi signal, it's the antenna system.
Any other questions, comments? I guess just for context, if I understood, this will now go to the Planning Commission. I think it's slated for an April.
This will go to the Planning Commission on April 10th, and tentatively move on to the Board of Supervisors after that. So April 10th is still the date. Because we pushed our resubmission as fast as we could to get all this information in. My understanding is there won't be a staff report prior to that Planning Commission date. But you'll have the benefit of the staff report we've had thus far, and then our response to it, which I'll be happy to provide to anybody who would like it. I can email it to you.
And if I can, Chris, again, staff report timing, because ultimately we'd like to see a staff report if we can, roughly, you think?
Right.
But that might be enough.
Based on the timeframes and everything, I'm seeing the Planning Commission April 10th. Typically it goes out 1 week before that meeting. Easter's right on that general time frame. So I'm really thinking it's going to be due March 28th, which is Wednesday. So it's after your CCAC, but it's still going to be in time for the Planning Commission for sure. And once it's available to the PC, then it can be available to the public, but it has to get to the PC before I can put it out to the public.
So while you're up, will you explain, just for the benefit of all of us, and you'll explain it better than I would, the FCC rule that allows for the one-time 20-foot extension?
So the FCC changed the regulations, I guess, 2 years ago that allows for a one-time extension in height and width for a tower of this nature. It's not going to be screened. It's not going to really have any mitigating factors. So let's say we approve it at 145. They can go up 20 feet taller than that. Let's say we go out 8 foot wide for the arrays. They could go one time out 20 foot wider than that. For this specific tower, that would be in play, but they would actually have to make the application and go through that. At this point, I haven't heard anything that that's their intent to do it. However, they could, if they wanted to, by right, because it would be an approved facility that's not being screened or the visibility is not being mitigated. All the stuff y'all guys have been talking about this today isn't really what staff is focusing on during the review. As Jenny said, the ordinance is in place, and it's really focused on visibility and mitigating the visibility from the entrance corridor, which is 250, as well as abutting owners, as well as abutting neighbors throughout the neighborhood. And that's kind of what my review really focuses on, not so much about how many kids are being benefited or financial anything. Even fire and rescue's ability to use this, staff isn't considering that. It's not in the ordinance. But I mean, I definitely understand you guys' concerns and where you're going with it, and it's good to know all the things you guys want to know, but staff can't take any of that kind of stuff into consideration during our recommendation to the Planning Commission and the board.
And can you touch on again, just real quickly, roughly how the ordinance is written? This is a tier 3?
So there's a couple different kinds of tiers in our current ordinance. A tier 3 would go through the special use permit process, which is a legislative process. It would go to the Planning Commission for a public hearing, and then a Board of Supervisors public hearing. And the board ultimately makes the action for approval or denial. The Planning Commission would merely recommend either approval or denial. And so the board really takes action. This specific tower has not only the height they're going for, 145, but they also have 4 special exceptions that the board has to act on. Those are criteria that are completely not met in the ordinance. With the first being color, they're going for silver versus brown. You guys took that away? Okay. Well, they had earlier requested color for silver versus brown, like you saw in the high school one, so it would blend in better with the actual sky. The number of arrays, the county ordinance requires permits up to 3. This has 5, so they're requesting a special exception for those additional 2. Standoff provisions of the ordinance. Typically, we look for flush mount, so it means the actual arrays are closer to the monopole versus these giant tree-like structures. They requested that one. And then a critical slopes waiver to disturb critical slopes in the county to do the access road. So those are the special exceptions that also the board has to act on in order for this specific proposal to go through. At this point, I'm not seeing why staff would recommend approval of it. It doesn't meet the ordinance, and I've conveyed that to the applicant. But they did go ahead and do the resubmittal and addressed a lot of the concerns to get the report, to get the actual application more user-friendly as we move through the process, to kind of bring a better presentation to you guys with screening along the entrance corridor. That's going to be great to mitigate that view right at the old trail entrance. They've also provided some trees along the back portion, which staff recommended. These things are great and they help sweeten the proposal. However, it still doesn't meet the county's requirements of the ordinance. So when I do my review, most likely this is going to be recommended for denial. As in what we're going to be recommending for all the critical slopes waiver, most likely approval of that one. I'm waiting for the county engineer on that. However, the number of arrays, the standoff distance, we would be recommending denial based on visibility. And the applicant knows all these things. So that's kind of where I'm at. But you know, the board has to take into a lot of different things in their decision, and I don't. I'm really focusing on the ordinance, and it's black and white. So that's where I'm at.
Thanks. Any other comments, questions?
Do you ever recommend that the law be changed?
That's really the board's purview. I'm reviewing this for the ordinance as well as the comp plan.
Okay.
And the comp plan was adopted by the board with citizen involvement.
Sure. But I mean, one of the reasons we have these views is because we do make exceptions to certain rules, like in zoning and things. You know, so.
So I wanted just to clarify, because we referenced the Albemarle Tower, and you showed pictures of that, and I couldn't find the minutes, but so this is from a Daily Progress article, which I'm sure is accurate. So the request is for 125, which is what the tower is built at. The board approved 105 because of the 20-foot one-time extension. So essentially, you achieved your 125 with that 20-foot extension, but the approval from the board was 105.
Can we just ask, what's the intention? Will it be 145 or will it be 165?
The intent is 145, and that's true, it's more accounting how that was done. Because of the Spectrum Act, there is a one-time 20-foot extension. Milestone didn't intend to do an extension, but to be safe, the county said, okay, we'll approve you 20 feet lower just to make sure you don't make it 20 feet taller.
The original intent was
right, the original intent was always
meant for becoming 145, which is what
Thank you. I think we have another.
Yeah. So my question is, the other towers that have been built, did it require any? I mean, did they match the ordinance? The one that was 125, they had to get a special permit too.
The board.
Okay, so they are allowed.
Yeah, these are not in violation of the zoning ordinance. It's just that you need a legislative process to ask if they're appropriate for the area. If they were in violation, they couldn't be approved. So that's a great question.
Well, if the stipulation was to build it by right, it would not comply. That was the distinction, I think, between the kinds. Chris very carefully, and Margaret Malashevsky also for the ARB, described the limitations of the guidelines that they have. The board also needs to take into consideration the scenic highway, the historic districts too, right here, that are not within the ARB guidelines, but certainly within the community standards. So there will be other issues as well that will come forward that people need to think about.
Sean, did you have last?
Two very quick points. So if they're requesting 145, shouldn't all these maps be 145 and not 140? I just find that, or was that intentional?
Well, you're not always necessarily going to be right at the very top of
That's
the
the
pole.
red center of your antenna. So the
Right.
monopole is
Okay,
typically.
that's fine. And number two, I'm curious, are we ever going to hear from anyone from Weston, Albemarle, or any of the other schools that are going to directly benefit? Like, I would like to hear from a principal who is advocating this strongly, or are they sort of, if it happens, great, if it doesn't, I mean, could we hear from?
I'd be happy to put you in touch with them. Yeah,
Well, if the contact is, it doesn't matter, like you said, it's all about the ordinance.
all of the 6 principals.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to do another.
No, that's just one thing.
I
Somebody's
would
concerned about that.
suggest, just like staff and the planning commission and the board, this body should be looking at it through the eyes of the ordinance.
And or I'd say if that's a concern, if you want to talk to them and share that with the group, either way. Again, very briefly.
Yeah, one quick question, and I just want to confirm because I came in late. We were planning to have members of the school board or a member of the school board here to speak to us this evening, and I just want to confirm that they didn't show up. Were they invited?
They were invited. I sent a note out asking.
Yeah, thanks.
Generally, for folks to show up. I didn't have a direct discussion. It was just sort of looking out to a number of folks at school. So listen again. Milestone, thanks. Ira, thanks for the information. I guess I'd say for this group, as we know, we have various HUDs come in front of us, projects come in front of us. Sometimes we choose to say something to the planning commission, sometimes we choose not to. I think you heard the schedule. It'll go before the planning commission after our March meeting, but before our April meeting. So I guess with that, I'll sort of throw it out to the group here briefly, at least in terms of, do we want to have the discussion now about are we going to say something or not? Do we want to digest what we heard and potentially pick that up in March? Curious, we can do whatever we want to do. We have a little bit of time. I didn't want to leave enough time for the master plan discussion, but thoughts briefly?
I would love for us to make a motion to approve it, recommend approval. I don't know what everybody thinks. If 3/4 of the people on the board don't. So if we have just a show of hands, how many would be interested in recommending approval, or is this premature to do? I would go for the approval, but I don't want to make a motion if nobody's going to.
Are people comfortable? Are we there yet? The folks want to make a decision or
I'm
a
comfortable saying
recommendation?
I'm not approved, so.
I'm comfortable saying I would.
And or we can punt and discuss in March. Strong opinions one way or another.
I move we punt.
I don't think you didn't ask enough people. What's the exact date? Four. Yeah, 3/4 against what it is. And just go around. He need time.
That's why discussing again in March is probably a good.
So March
is to do some research, if they have questions they want to.
All right, think about it, think about what you heard. If anybody feels strongly one way or another and wants to put forth any kind of a draft, here's what we might say. That's always a good thing, to shorten discussions in March. So talk to me if somebody's interested in doing that. But otherwise, we'll pause and maybe have a brief discussion in March. All right, good. Thank you. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
I guess our other main item for tonight is to follow on our discussion from last meeting. The survey committee has done a ton of great work in folks performing the study, pulling together results, and they took one more step where they sort of said, okay, this is what we think the survey says, and this is making some implications for how it relates to the master plan. So I think Tim and or Sean, Tim's going to do a little presentation summarizing some of that for us. While Tim's setting up, what I wanted to ask the group to think about is, again, this is all great information. The survey committee while we're waiting for the county to be able to update our master plan, said, listen, we can do some productive things, let's go out and redo the survey in preparation for a master plan upgrade. I guess my question to this group is, okay, what do we think we want to do with this information? We can transmit it to the board with agreement of the survey committee, as is. We can use it to rework the master plan and say, gee, are other things in the master plan we think are important? And when I say important in terms of a review of the master plan, in terms of an update of the master plan. That's sort of another angle we could take. Again, we don't need to answer that question right now. Let's hear Tim out and we can come back to that time permitting at the end of the presentation.
Didn't come prepared to do this on the windows.
I think you can just snap your fingers and make that happen, right?
Only with that.
Well, there you
He is the IT.
go. No, I'm Tim, IT guy. Of course, you're security, so you don't know much about the old laptop thing.
No, the problem is I do Max.
Well, while Tim's doing that, I'm going to jump ahead and deal with just one or two announcements, if that's okay. Just use the time. A couple announcements. Positions are open on the CCAC for beginning in April. There's a link to applications. If your term's expiring but you want to re-up, you need to reapply. So please do so if you're a current member. If you know anybody else who you think would be interested in serving on the CCAC, please pass my email with the link along. And if anybody here is interested in serving on the CCAC, please apply. Also, in March, as we normally do, we'll take nominations for officers for this year. And I think Mr. Betts volunteered to be our nominating committee and take over maybe John Savage for the March meeting. We usually try to keep it pretty informal, and that is if you want to volunteer for chair, vice chair, or secretary, shoot Phil an email, or if you want to nominate somebody else, shoot Phil an email and he'll talk to those people. So hopefully by the time we get to the next meeting, we have a group of people saying, yep, they want to do that. There are a number of us who are turning off of the committee.
Who are they now? Dave? Kim?
Sorry. I think those that have served at least
3 terms?
Yes.
Yeah, we also have a term limit.
So those
Three terms or
3 2-year terms.
Bill and I are retired.
So all the guidelines, it's confusing. All the guidelines say 2 2-year terms, but you can ask and be extended as a number.
Which is customary for this organization.
Right.
It used to be 3 3-year terms, so it's shorter than it is.
Thank God it's not.
So people whose terms are expiring this year's Kim, Dean, Phil, James King is already off, Costas, Leslie, Martin, and myself. And if you apply the 2 2-year extension rule, I, Leslie, Phil, and Kim would be terming off.
Not extended.
Right. When I say terming off, meaning that you've served 2 or 3.
Leslie, you've had 4 years. So you've been signed up.
She's been here for
I've
been here,
I've
yeah.
Kim.
Yeah.
Okay, so Dean, Costas, Martin, and somebody else can reapply because they've only had 1 term. I could therefore have 2 more.
Yeah.
Dave.
Correct.
Dean, Dave, Costas, Mark.
Oh, you're not going. Oh, good. Oh, okay.
And there is,
Did Emily answer? Sounds like yes.
Yeah, honestly, my intention was to take my 2 terms and term off.
And he says he's not.
I think we asked Emily once you've served and how long it is until you can serve again, and I think it was 2 years. of not serving members.
Oh,
from-
we
One
have to come back.
term
Oh,
off.
after you take it.
One term off, you can come back on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stay on.
Gotcha.
Oh, you're not hiding back there.
Oh,
I didn't see you. So 2 years and then they can.
Yeah, you have to take a whole term off, and then you can come back.
All right, so nominations to fill, and looks like we're good to go.
Self-nominations are encouraged.
Anything else on that? Thanks.
All right.
Ken, go, thank you.
You're welcome, thank you. So what the survey committee wanted to do, we were here last week and presented the results of the scientific survey. What we then did, after hearing from you guys, was sort of take those results and go, and we did this when we were doing the initial survey design, go back and say, okay, from the 2010 master plan, what were the guiding principles of the 2010 master plan? And what does the survey results speak to those guiding principles? So from that, there were 7 guiding principles, 5 of which the survey sort of directly related to and touched on. So we've summarized these 5 here. They're also on page 6 of the 2010 Crozet Master Plan, that list. They were basically preserve Crozet small town feel. Don't alter the growth area boundary, keep growth area boundary, protect the rural areas around it. Said in several different places and 3 different guiding principles, basically summarized to ensure downtown Crozet is the center of development. And we'll see more about that when we go through some of the questions that were on the survey. Limit commercial development along Route 250, which also went to don't alter the growth area boundary. And regarding any development of the I-64 interchange, the 2010 master plan said don't allow development along the I-64 interchange. The reason this says to be discussed here is the survey results on that were one of the few places where the results were plus or minus 50% for and against development at the I-64 interchange. So that's one of the things we think would be productive to discuss in this group. That may also, I think, be a point when we get to actually revision of the Crozet Master Plan, a very good point to have in a town hall meeting where we can have maps and discussion and actually sort of unpack what's involved in the notion of development at the I-64 interchange. And then last, more transportation options, including especially biking and hiking options, as we just heard, I think it was just last week, time flies, you know, the issues with the eastern corridor and the north-south corridor behind here, the transportation issues here. This reinforces that issue yet again. So the first principle was preserve Crozet small town feel. Even while we know development's coming, we want to preserve that feel. And so on the Crozet Master Plan on page 7, it talked about preserving that and keeping the small town feel of Crozet. And that includes, you'll notice again, it talks about trails and greenways for transportation as part of that idea. Keeping downtown vibrant is part of that idea. One of the things to remember is that in 2010, when we were doing the master plan revision, we were still trying to get this library built. And so that was not a sure thing at that point. So one of the questions from the survey that directly tapped into this question about small town feel was these results. And as Sean told us at the last CCAC meeting, in general, people saw these as very important to somewhat important. So the 2 blue lines are very important and somewhat important, the dark blue lines and the light blue lines. So you can see that even all the way down to many community events has overwhelming community support for things that help to preserve Crozet small town feel. The only one that wasn't over 50% was ability to work in Crozet.
I suppose that's because people don't think it's possible.
Yeah, I think that's some of it.
If it were possible, that might change.
If it were possible, it might change. The other was don't alter the growth area boundary. On page 5 of the 2010 master plan, it said achieve the goals of a compact livable development and keep the rural areas rural. Then it also on page 32, it stated that we recommend the rural areas outside the community because they remain rural, additional commercial and industrial development of the fringe areas, that is those areas that touch the development area lines, is not recommended. The I-64 interchange is one of those things that's actually on the fringe area. So that was one of the things that touched on that. We had several questions in the survey on this issue of opposing growth areas expansion or more development areas. And in general, it came out this way for all of them. The majority of the people were opposed, 73% were opposed, 27% favored expanding that area. So the community continues to think that this is something to be valued, something to preserve, something to protect. The third principle was keeping downtown as the center for development. There were several places in the master plan that highlighted that. The master plan said that it's an important area for downtown, continues to serve as the focal point for cultural and commercial development, and direct growth to the downtown with a mix of residential, commercial, office, R&D, flex, and light. One of the things that had happened before the 2009 revision started of the master plan was we had done the downtown zoning a couple of years before that. So that was where this notion of making sure that the downtown area included office, residential, and flex light manufacturing in the mix came about. And so that was the question, sort of directly in the survey was, do you favor or oppose that principle of making the downtown the principal development and social business center? And everybody was in favor of that. Keep it downtown. Sort of related to that was whether you want commercial development and a mix of commercial and residential, and again, 80% were in favor of that mix. Part and parcel with keeping downtown and making downtown the commercial center means that you should probably limit the growth on the 250 because you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't expect development to happen along 250 and that not to have a negative impact on downtown, at least in terms of which goes first. And so the master plan had that same idea that we limit the development along 250. We preserve the fact that 250 is a scenic byway and limit the amount of properties adjacent to 250 West being able to grow there. So again, we asked that in the survey directly. And we tried to make people aware of that region that we're talking about, from Fox Chase to Pro Renata, being protected. And 70%, 69% of people wanted it protected from more development. That again helps to preserve the downtown. And a similar question, do you want favor or opposed development along Route 250? Again, 63, 64% are opposed to more development along 250, which helps support the idea that we need the growth to happen in downtown, not out along 250. But I think the sense has always been we don't want 250 to become another 29 North at some point by having lots of development out there. Another part of the Crozet Master Plan on page 32 had a long speaking to the issue of growth along 250. One of the things to note on that interchange at I-64, it's really the Yancey Mill Lumberyard quadrant, which is the eastern quadrant it's talking about, that is actually potential for development. And again, shortly before the 2010 Master Plan revision, there was actually a request to rezone that to commercial, that the CCAC twice passed resolutions opposing that, and the community, because of the community support for opposing development at the I-64 interchange at that spot. And so that's what, as this line here says, after study and is important for residents is determined that the expansion of the development area is not warranted at this time. That was all, as a summary of all of that work at that time. And again, this preserves the rural area. It means keep the growth area of Crozet inside the growth area of Crozet, not expand the growth area to encompass new things. Another question on the same thing. This is what I was saying earlier. This was the one question where response on this was about equal. Our margin of error on the survey was plus or minus 4%, which means that those in favor, if we did this 100 times, the notion of margin error is statistical. If we did the survey 100 times, every time we would expect the people in favor on this question to be somewhere between 51% and 59%. And the people opposed to be somewhere between 41% and 49%, even if we did the survey 100 times. That we have captured the people, scientific people, we have captured the homes in the Crozet growth area, and that's what they feel like. That's their sentiment. Personally, I think that some of this comes from, we know from what we presented last time, that some of the survey answers have been here for 10 years or fewer. And so I think that a lot of people weren't aware, for example, that when you think of the I-64 interchange, there's only one quadrant that really can be developed. It can't, the other three can't really be developed. They're not in play. And so we don't know how much that comes into play. That's why I think this is a really good thing to have a town hall about and talk about what's the pros and cons, what's actually possible in this space. And then the transportation options, supported both in the 2004, 2005 master plan and the 2010 master plan was this notion of walking and biking paths. And of course, the Crozet Trails crew and all of its good work is testament from the first Crozet master plan of the community's value, the value the community puts on making walkable, bikeable paths in the greater Crozet area. The Crozet Trails crew was spawned from Jessica Mousey's. She was one of the early members of the CCAC. She saw a need for that to be a trails crew, somebody that would actually take this issue of biking and walking paths and run with it. And you know, we are the beneficiaries of all that hard work to this day.
Terry, my motto is the current chair.
Right.
Try not to let people know that.
She's been very effective in leading the organization. Right. In fact, we built the bridge this morning, so.
Right. And in the survey, we had questions about alternative options, and you can see that, again, the strongest supports are pedestrian safety and walking as an alternative, biking as an alternative. We're all strongly supported. So again, I think that principle is going to be one that is supported in the, this revision of the master plan. I thought this result was interesting since there's been talk, actual, of it coming in the works.
Commuter bus. Yeah.
The commuter bus option was not as strongly supported as we sort of thought maybe it would be. But it's still slightly over 50% of
that may just be the people who don't, it's not important to them.
Yeah, right, right. That's what we've got. That's sort of what we're trying to do was take the survey and now let's connect it to the master plan. Certainly I'm willing to entertain questions or stir debate.
Tim, on the question about the I-64, wasn't it true that if you look at the total amount of surveys, that it was slightly flipped the other way?
On the volunteer survey?
Yeah, if we took in the volunteer survey and the side, you know.
It was closer to 50 or 50.
Right, it was closer to 50-50.
Because again, the volunteer survey was disproportionately leaning toward old timers versus new residents.
And probably those who would show up at the town hall.
I think it's important historically to note that the reason that the I-64 was included in the 2010 is because the board, there was a proposition to do a light industrial park there, and two, the board asked the community during the master planning process to take that issue up, which we did, and that was the result, was not develop the I-64.
And I believe to keep it to get approved for the comp plan amendment.
Right, and I think that question was vague I mean, intentionally, because we can't get into asking so many specifics and not have this terribly long survey. So I think what you pointed out about the town hall and more community engagement is important to find out what people meant when they said that, because I think the way it was worded was just development without any
context.
Or they want a McDonald's or a Cracker Barrel, or do they want a light industrial park or a strip mall or what? I mean, a hotel. I think people could have had lots of things in mind when they answered that question. We need to find out.
The way I'd like to look at it is, you know, when you parse the data, the longer someone's lived here, the more expensive they are. You know, I'd rather look at it that way than a scientific sample versus the non-scientific sample. And, you know, I mean, maybe it's a problem of lack of education, you know, for these people who've lived here, you know, 5 years or 3 years or 2 years, as to why this is an important part of the master plan, where the growth area ends there and doesn't extend to this I-64 intersection. So I'd rather approach it in that direction, you know, and like if we're going to present something to the board, you know, I'm totally happy with 4 out of those 5 things on your first slide. And like, I think we really need to reemphasize, you know, number 4 out of 5 is this 250 interchange should not be developed. And you know, the more history you know about what's going on there, the more against it you are. You know, there are reasons that we could elucidate to people, you know, maybe it's a town hall meeting or something like that. But, you know, I'd rather approach it from that perspective than a non-scientific versus scientific survey perspective.
And I think when we go into formal review for master planning, whenever that is that, no. And the more small area plans and the more things that come down the pipes, the longer we wait, but Pantops is under review now, and we're after them. But there are little small area plans popping up, and that takes staff time and resources.
When I asked the question about schedule directly, they basically said, Pantops is next, it's going to take us at least a year. So at the earliest, we're starting review sometime next year. And I think we'll be lucky if it's starting this time next year.
I mean, be that as it may,
delay another year.
You know, be that as it may, I feel like that, you know, this question, you know, 4 out of 5 there, you know, I feel like this is like the purpose of this body here is to steer these things in a direction that's acceptable to.
Well, if I may, that's a really good sort of segue into, okay, this is great work, really good information. Now what? I think there's a number of folks, both on this committee and the survey community, who feel real strongly that we want to use this as an opportunity to say something to the planning commission and the board now, not in 2 years or a year and a half when the master plan might be being updated. And I guess that's...
Yeah, I mean, if I can piggyback, I mean, for example, I think these results really support the Adelaide decision of limiting growth along 250.
I think you have to remember that the Adelaide decision, the staff favored the Adelaide decision. The staff also favored the one decision on 250, on the Bayou, restoring station. I think that we have to take up, because of the time element between us and the master plan, we have to take up these issues. We have to make statements to the board that essentially during the interim doesn't leave them with much ambiguity about the way that the community feels. I think to do nothing, especially with the last one on the I-64 interchange, would essentially be looked at as tantamount to an approval.
Tom, I agree with you. I would hope, though, that we could take these up discreetly. We don't have to have a single package of recommendations on all 5, but that we can, if there's something that's incredibly obvious, we say so.
Well, I think we should make it, I think there's enough in the survey that we can reiterate the principles that were incorporated into the 2010, 2010 master plan, and go to the board and say, you know, we've looked at this, we just redid a survey, and these are the important points for, you know, until the master plan is done, we'd like to see, you know, these principles be respected by the board in as much as their planning goes. I agree.
And that's not, again, where the suggestion, the idea is not to get into nitty-gritty, overhaul the master plan. It's really to pull forward those things that the survey supports, that the master plan says that we've seen misinterpreted, in my opinion, with Adelaide as an example, and just clean that up, pull it together, in a way that I think it's very reasonable to ask. I don't know if the planning commission's part of that, or if it would just go straight to the board, that while we're waiting, that they recognize that as an amendment.
These principles be protected.
Right, and then in addition to that, we can start generating a great list of ideas of things that we know that we need to revisit that are bigger, like why that question was the way it was about the EMC property. That's something we want to do in formal master planning, or what we might do with the park, and big things that we need to change when it is our time. I think we should pull from this group and take it over
I would even look to expand it. I mean, one of the things that was not in the survey, but that I would think that we would want to take up is the principle that if, we don't get into another position like we did with the brewery, with behind us, behind the CCAC, behind the community, the county is promulgating, property for, comp plan amendments before notifying the CAC. To me, and I think it's whether both within the growth area and contiguous to the growth area, that we should be notified if anything is going to be considered. I don't just, because my fear is that, with this new economic development push, is that they're going to be, again, working behind the scenes. And what happened that time is that suppose that company decided they did like Old Trail. There would have been one supervisor saying no, the rest of them saying, well, this community is against 500 jobs. How can that be? I think that, that we have to, like I said, I would even expand it to add coverage, onto the principles. And another principle would be that we be notified of any land use decisions that are within the, that are not in the context of the master plan, and those lands contiguous to the growth area, just to protect ourselves.
Along those lines, that's one question I wanted to put to the group is this the right list of stuff to go with, or are there other really important things that weren't necessarily exactly survey related, but we've talked about it in the last 2 years that we might want to add to the list? Again, I agree with Jenny, we don't want to get into a line-by-line detailed of, here's 40 pages of master plan updates, but I think we might want to take some time to just look at the master plan, remember what we've done here in this group for the last 2 years, and then figure out, okay, is there anything else we want to add to that list? Because again, my suggestion to the group, but it's up to
and I think what we can have too is the potential for 2 lists, that main list that we really want to streamline, and then another list of things that will come up, things that people have thought and read, and as they learn the plan, that we aren't going to necessarily move forward with the board with that request now, but when we go into review, areas people have seen in the plan that they thought were vague, or we need to have some more, expand on how we interact with the park, or all these type of things that we can't necessarily push forward now, but are going to be super important to get on another list that we have as a working list, that when it's our time, we're super ready and prepared.
But is this group able to issue anything? So if we're waiting for this review, which we don't really have a date on, or is this body able to issue something that pulls some of these things out, kind of bridge the gap?
That's what I was suggesting by going to the street and choosing those that we know clearly.
The CCAC, if we're able to.
I think we can say whatever we want.
Your task is to help implement the master plan that's adopted and to keep it fresh. So these are great because you pull together things from pages 212, 42, and whatever, and put them in one list. And I remember back from last year, there was a discrepancy between what the text said and what the map said. And so having something that explains very carefully, forget the map, this is what we're talking about. Or pick whichever one it is and make sure to hammer it home So it's very clear.
And the good news for us is that all of the supporting documentation in 2010, with the exception of the question on I-64, is already supported in 2010.
With a very carefully worded
Yeah.
survey too, which is just spectacular.
And see, and I really take offense to number 4, that little in the brackets, because that's setting it out like that's a main one. That could be, if you're gonna limit corporate development along 250, then that could be in bracket with number 2. Because you're changing the growth.
Yeah.
And I don't want that to seem like that's so important we have to put a bracket around it. If you putting it in that master plan.
Well, I think we just have to acknowledge the fact that the survey results indicate an interest in pursuing that.
Yeah, I just don't want to see it.
Oh, no.
We can,
Yeah.
But we can't ignore the fact that
I
there was
thought
a
he
lot
said
of
this
people.
sheet was in the master
Just
plan.
put that as a column.
Different topics.
Column one.
How he pulls like the page numbers,
Okay.
I think is what she meant, but that one.
I've got a question. When I looked at the master plan, because I was interested in seeing if we could get any more roads built or improved, so I wouldn't be taking my life in my hands when I went out of my neighborhood. One of the things I noticed was there's code words used in the master plan that really mean, not to be done for 25 years, or not to be done for 10 years. So when I talked to the staff about that, I was really quite shocked. So I think we should look at the master plan and see what the codes mean as far as when something might be developed, because I would change the rank ordering of some of those things.
To be honest, if you go back, I go back 23 years, when we first started with the first master plan, there was this thing called concurrent infrastructure. And remember, we were taking a town from 2,000 souls up to over 12,000, because the original max ideal population was 12,198. We were going from 2,000 to 12,000, and we were promised at the time, well, don't worry, there's going to be concurrent infrastructure improvements along the way. You know, it's been the big myth. You know.
We should let them figure out what the word concurrent means.
We know what it means.
But I think that type of detail, especially from someone like you that served for so long, is what we want to also capture, and that's kind of maybe homework or whatever, however you want to take it, that it's an email to Dave, or it's something we want people who've read the master plan backwards, forwards, and see things in there that we want to revisit. That's the kind of stuff we want to get from you before you, not that you're going away.
No, let me go away.
But, and when we go under review, hopefully you show up, but that's the kind of stuff we really want to capture. Because members who served that long have seen where we need to clean up some stuff, or that wasn't what you thought it meant, and you learned something different, so maybe that's a change.
I mean, one suggestion that somebody made to me was we take next meeting, we all say, go home, get out your master plans, do your homework, and we come back and have sort of a work session. This is clearly, the main list. Are there other things we want to emphasize? And again, not drag this out in a 4-month process, but over a meeting or two, try to distill a document in whatever priority we want, with brackets or without. Again, I think the only thing we just need to be careful about, we don't want to get bogged down into all the detail, because it's going to change. There'll be a lot of underlying data that will change when the update is done. But again, just trying to throw it out to the group, if folks feel like that's a good use of time, maybe for our next meeting.
And for the next meeting, more like most pressing in my mind because of timeliness and losing members that have a history, is what would you say? Would there be 5, or would there be 6 or 4? What would they be if you wanted to take something to the board and say, until we go under review, we want this to be recognized in the very front and center of our master plan?
Yeah, I'd like that to be unequivocal points, whether it's 4 or 5 or 6. Some of the wording in those ones just strike me as kind of weak, no offense, but I really feel that's our job here, is to be a steering committee to you know, be a voice for this stuff. And even, you know, like I said earlier, in these results, where, well, you know, maybe the new people are skewing this result one way or the other, you know. Someone who's been on this committee 6 years should be the voice to steer that to something that we can present to the Board of Supervisors as like a strongly worded statement, you know, based on the master plan originally, and, you know, something that at least we can go on the record that, you know, not leaving them wiggle room that screws over.
Right. And there are things that weren't addressed by the survey that have been issues that we've wanted to address before the new master plan. One of them was the way that developers could take those pieces of land, combine them, use their, you know, yeah, I mean, so that was something that's caused us a lot of anguish here, and we feel that it twists, it takes advantage of, and maybe that is not something that's specifically listed in the master plan, but I think there are some things that along the way we've thought we really should have somehow talk about this in the new master plan.
And I would say to that I definitely feel passionately about that issue. Yeah, because it is directly affected me.
Yes.
But it is a land use issue, it's a countywide issue, it's on a lot of our work lists as things, it's a big thing. And there'll be a lot of people who obviously don't support something like that being changed. And so, while I absolutely think it's important, I do not think that that's something that we should approach the board with our initial request. I think that is a bigger topic that I think would be a master plan review topic or a planning commission and board topic. It's on work lists to review, but
And the
there's some major
already
land use.
being changed.
That's not, I mean, that would not be taken lightly. And I think if we clump that in with 5 principles and kick it to the board, that probably would be a deal breaker. That's just my personal opinion.
And I think,
not that it's not important.
I guess I'd encourage the group to say, let's do our homework and get our list together, and then make some of those calls about, you know, which are on the list that we're trying to.
I mean, we need to pick our battles, I guess.
Because I can sort of go either way. I hear what you're saying, it's a big issue, it's gonna run for a while. Well, maybe that's the reason to say it.
I didn't know that what we were going to put together was just specifically only points that had been discussed in the survey. Because I just know that there are things that we have been fighting against and working for here that, you know, if we really are up for a year from now for review, I think that we need to start, and I'm not going to be around that much longer, so I can't really say what you are going to take on moving forward from here. This is like a living organism, and new voices and new people do come in, and they will affect where this little town goes. Whether the people who have been here a long time or not like it, that's part of our society. But I do feel like that there are things that are really important to us that have caused us a lot of anguish, that in preparation for that upcoming time that we should work on it.
So we're being time noticed here.
Okay.
I'm hearing a consensus that people do want to transmit this and maybe some other stuff. I'm hearing a consensus that people are willing to spend some time next meeting. I'll take it upon myself to go back, look at all our minutes, look at all our resolutions, and try to distill what that list of important stuff we've said is. If you guys will all go do your homework and read the master plan and come back with your lists.
Yeah, I would add,
yeah,
you can have, we can get your copy of the slides.
That's
But
great.
I found it instructive to take a principle, even if it wasn't one of these 7 guiding principles, and then find where it's either supported or opposed in the master plan. It, you know, it really surprised me, you know, in one of those principles, it was like in 8 different pages scattered throughout the master plan. And that I hadn't realized that in different ways, in different places in the master plan, it was emphasizing that issue.
And I think we'll need to think about how best do we do this have this discussion efficiently. So if anybody has thoughts, because again, I think staff takes a year to do a master plan update. What we're talking about is a meeting or two.
My idea would be think about it in the way, like 2 lists. A list that you would like to craft to potentially take to the board, and then another list that has really important things. And maybe the group agrees that that's one you want to take to the board. And it's just my personal opinion that could create a barrier in achieving the goal that we have for just get us something to hold us over. And so I think that's how I would approach it, is 2 different things. Ideas that we don't need that we're not going to take to the board in a couple months, and then those ideas that are super important that we heard over and over again.
The website's down. I alerted IT. Did Allison figure it out?
So if you go to albemarle.org/Crozet, it has copies of the master plans, it has a copy of the guiding principles right there. And the presentation, the survey PowerPoint is what David sent out, yesterday or the day before. And we will be turning them into PDFs and putting them up on the CrozetCommunity.org website as well.
Any other?
We talked about too the idea that people could email you things that they would like ahead of time, and then you could sort of compile them into categories of transportation or.
How long is the master plan?
Does it have
16 pages total?
Does it
make sense to chop it up between members, or?
If you don't have a copy, tell me, and I'll make sure to get you one in the next week. You should have gotten copies.
The problem with chopping it up is that it's divided up in different copies.
Others are more interested in the
Let's wrap up. What I'll do is I'll try to put some suggestions out, and if people are interested in leading different parts of the discussion next week, let me know. If you have specific comments or suggestions, again, let me know. I'll try to compile those so that hopefully we're not necessarily started cold. That maybe by the time we even walk in here, we have this plus the other 5 key ones that we want to say something about.
And since you only have 60 pages to read in this, looking at some of the more recent master plans, they are organized differently. And there may be a formatting shift that is done now that might be advantageous for us. And we have the text is mostly fabulous, and we just may need to reorganize it so it's more effective and more easy to use and more compelling when we need to use it in the back.
Is there a better choice for us to look at?
I can't figure out which one exactly, but Elaine probably would make a recommendation. And I could do that. I will jump in on Tim's turf here, but March 8th at the CCA meeting, Kevin McDermott is going to come and do an update on transportation things out here. I just was in a meeting about some of those things this afternoon, and there's a whole lot of really big news that's coming, so please come and learn all about that at the CCA on March 8th.
March 8th, 7:30, Ocean Hill School.
Anything else anybody? Andy has some town halls coming up, please.
The March 8th meeting will be at Town Hall with Ann as well.
When people are worn out with the Tim stuff, then anybody who wants to stay can do that. And then the 15th in Earlysville, the 24th, White Oak Community Center. But the release just went out today, so it'll be popping up all over the place. Hopefully Mike will run it.
I'll have it.
Anything else?
And next month's meeting is at the field school.
Oh, yes, thank you. Field school. This room was taken to the festival book event, so we're at the field school, which is good and bad because we have more time. All right, thank you everybody for doing
Oh, big deal.
Yes.